Right? Said no technology today. Book is better.
Okay, I think we have to keep the page.
Let me see. This is live. صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان. الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وزعها للأنام فيها فاكهة ونخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجن من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. وله الجوار المنشآت في البحر كالأعلام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. يسأل من في السماوات والأرض كل يوم هو في الشان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. سنفرغ لكم أيها الثقلان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. يا معشر الجن والإنس إن استطعتم أن تنفذوا من أقطار السماوات والأرض فانفذوا ولتنفذوا إلا بسلطان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. يرسل عليكما شواظ من نار ونحاس فلا تنتصران فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. فإذا انشقت السماء فكانت وردة كالدهان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. فيومئذ لا يسأل عن ذنبه إنس ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. يعرف المجرمون بسيماهم فيؤخذوا بالنواسي والأقدام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. هذه جهنم التي يكذب بها المجرمون يطوفون بيننا وبين حميم آن فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان ولمن خاف مقام ربه جنتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان ذواتا أفنان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما عينان تجريان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما من كل فاكهة زوجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان متكئين على فرش بطائنها من مستبرق وجنى الجنتين دان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهن قاصرات الطرف لم يطمثهن إنس قبلهم ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان كالأنهن الياقوت والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان ومن دونهما جنتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان مدحامتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما عينان نضاختان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما فاكهة ونخل ورمان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهن خيرات حسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان حور مقصورات في الخيام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان لم يطمثهن إنس قبلهم ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان متكئين على رفرف خضر وعبقري حسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان تبارك اسم ربك ذي الجلال والإكرام صدق الله العلي العظيم صلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا وقعت الواقعة ليس لوقعتها كاذبة خافضة رافعة. إذا رجت الأرض رجة وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء منبثا وكنتم أزواجا ثلاثة فأصحاب الميمنة ما أصحاب الميمنة وأصحاب المشأمة ما أصحاب المشأمة والسابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون في جنات النعيم. ثلة من الأولين وقليل من الآخرين على سرر موضونة متكئين عليها متقابلين يطوف عليهم ولدان مخلدون بأكواب وأباريق وكأس من معين لا يصدعون عنها ولا ينزفون وفاكهة مما يتخيرون ولحم طير مما يشتهون وحور عين كأمثال اللؤلؤ المكنون جزاء بما كانوا يأملون. لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا تأثيما إلا قيلا سلاما سلاما. وأصحاب اليمين ما أصحاب اليمين في سدر مخضود وطلح منضود وظل ممدود وماء مسكوب وفاكهة كثيرة لا مقطوعة ولا ممنوعة وفرش مرفوعة إنا أنشأناهن إنشاء فجعلناهن أبكارا عربا ترابا لأصحاب اليمين ثلة من الأولين وثلة من الآخرين. وأصحاب الشمال ما أصحاب الشمال في سموم وحميم وظل من يحموم لا بارد ولا كريم. إنهم كانوا قبل ذلك مترفين وكانوا يصرون على الحنث العظيم وكانوا يقولون أئذا متنا وكنا ترابا وعظاما أئنا لمبعوثون أو آباؤنا الأولون قل إن الأولين والآخرين لمجموعون إلى ميقات يوم معلوم ثم إنكم أيها الضالون المكذبون لآكلون من شجر من زقوم فمالئون منها البطون فشاربون عليه من الحميم فشاربون شرب الحيم هذا نزلهم يوم الدين. نحن خلقناكم فلولا تصدقون أفرأيتم ما تمنون أأنتم تخلقونه أم نحن الخالقون نحن قدرنا بينكم الموت وما نحن بمسبوقين على أن نبدل أمثالكم وننشئكم فيما لا تعلمون ولقد علمتم النشأة الأولى فلولا تذكرون أفرأيتم ما تحرثون أأنتم تزرعونه أم نحن الزارعون لو نشاء لجعلناه حتاما فظلتم تفكهون إنا لمغرمون بل نحن محرومون. أفرأيتم الماء الذي تشربون أأنتم أنزلتموه من المزن أم نحن المنزلون؟ لو نشاء جعلناه أجاجا فلولا تشكرون. أفرأيتم النار التي تورون أأنتم أنشأتم شجرتها أم نحن المنشئون؟ نحن جعلناها تذكرة ومتاعا للمقوين. فسبح باسم ربك العظيم. فلا أقسم بمواقع النجوم وإنه لقسم لو تعلمون عظيم. إنه لقرآن كريم في كتاب مكنون لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. تنزيل من رب العالمين. أفبهذا الحديث أنتم مدهنون وتجعلون رزقكم أنكم تكذبون. فلولا إذا بلغت الحلقوم وأنتم حينئذ تنظرون.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا حجة الله. أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والتين والزيتون وطور سينين وهذا البلد الأمين. لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن التقويم ثم رددناه أسفل السافلين إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات فلهم أجر غير ممنون. فما يكذبك بعد بالدين أليس الله بأحكم الحاكمين. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربي. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربي. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم يا لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد.
You have not destined it to be in. For surely you are of your mercy. So send your blessings upon Muhammad and his family, and bestow your kindness upon your servant. Surely you are the possessor of magnificent kindness. For Muhammad wa ali Muhammad sallallahu.
تقبل الله تقبل الله عليكم السلام وما عليكم إن شاء الله.
This is just a reminder that the workshop for boys and girls aged 9 through 12 is currently going on. Please gather at the workshop area, all boys and girls aged 9 through 12. Thank you.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. आबाद हुई करबो बला
اجرا مدینہ برباد ہوئی میں، یوں حضرت زینب نے کہا، پیٹ کے سینہ برباد ہوئی میں۔ ایک دن تھا کہ چادر میرے سر سے گری تھی، سورج بھی نہ نکلا، سر ننگے پھراتا ہے مجھے آج کمینہ، برباد ہوئی میں۔ ایک دن تھا کہ اس شہر کی کرتی تھی میں شاہی، اور آج تباہی، بے غسل پڑا مہر نبوت کا نگینہ، برباد ہوئی میں۔ بھائی موئے، بیٹے موئے، زندہ میں پھنسے وارث نہیں کوئی، عباس نہیں، جیتے نہیں، شاہ مدینہ برباد ہوئی میں۔ یہ نیل تماچوں کے میرے منہ پہ پڑے ہیں، میں کس کو دکھاؤں، نیزے کے تلے بیٹھ کہ روتی ہے سکینہ برباد ہوئی میں قاسم نہیں اکبر نہیں عباس نہیں ہے عابد ہے تو بیمار یہ کیسا پڑا مجھ پہ محرم کا مہینہ برباد ہوئی میں آباد ہوئی کرب و بلا اجرا مدینہ برباد ہوئی میں اور محمد و آل محمد صلوات ارواح المؤمنین والمؤمنات سورة المبارکة الفاتحة. Bismillah ar-Rahmaan ar-Rahim. Our visiting speakers, Sheikh Anwar Jaffer, Zakir Batul Arastu, respected elders, dearest brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum, Jameen wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for all marhumin listed on the screen, as well as all other marhumin, Surah Al-Mubarak Al-Fatiha. Dua Shfa Mariz is requested for all those in need here and elsewhere, as well as those listed on the screen. Let us recite together, Bismillah ar-Rahmaan ar-Rahim. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. Ya Allah. The Muharram and Safar Fund is now open and a contribution of $300 per family is requested. However, no amount is too small. A kind reminder on behalf of the workshop team. All mothers are requested to please accompany their children during the Kiddy Time sessions, which is for children up to the age of 5, as well as for the morning workshop for children between the ages of 6 and 10. Again, all mothers are respectfully asked to please be around the venue the entire time your children are participating in the workshop. Your presence guarantees their security and enables the workshop team to properly communicate with you if in case further assistance is required. On a separate note, tonight the teen workshop for youth aged 13 through 23 will take place in the ladies' hall after the main program. Before tonight's Majlis, if we could once again request all the brothers to please move as far forward as possible to make room for those that will be joining us later. Let us move forward with a loud Na'ar Salawat. At this time, let us invite Sheikh Anwar Jaffer to please come forward for tonight's Majlis. By Muhammad wa Muhammad Salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أفرأيت من اتخذ إلهه هواه وأذله الله على علم وختم على سمعه وقلبه وجعل على بصره غشاوة آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The ayah of the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presents to us a very powerful principle, a philosophy, an idea, a conclusion with regards to the identity of the human being. And what he says, the ayah doesn't mention this clearly, but through the examination of tonight's discussion, we'll understand what exactly the conclusion is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is presenting to us. The conclusion is that every single human being has been designed to be a slave. Who we end up being a slave of, that is a choice that is there within our hands. In response, you find that when you look at secular society and the values that secular society presents is the values of liberation and freedom. And this is something very loud and clear, and it's very much there within the nuance when you live in European societies or even in North American societies. That as a human being, you are free, you are liberated, you can do whatever you want. And it's very interesting that this particular concept or this philosophy, this ideology is marketed in such a way. That's why many people are attracted to these sorts of lands in these areas of the world. If you look at certain countries, for example, if you compare countries of the world, you'll find that there are certain countries there are restrictions. Socially, how you interact with people in public, there are restrictions. What you can buy, what you could sell, there are restrictions. How to behave, for example, and so on and so forth. Because all of these restrictions that are there within these countries, when they look towards countries which promote liberation and freedom of the human being, that you as a human being, you are free, they are naturally attracted to it. There is an appeal towards it. Why is there an appeal? Because we mentioned when we discussed the fitrah of the human being, the fitrah of the human being very much loves the idea of being free, of being liberated. But then the question arises. The question is, when there is this heavy promotion of liberation and freedom, does it live up to its expectations? Does it fulfill the promises that it makes? So, in order to begin this discussion, when you look at secular societies and the value of liberation and freedom that it promotes, it mentions or it tells the human being, it conditions the human being so that they are informed that you as a human being, you are free. In all dimensions of your life, you are free. Intellectually, you are free. When it comes to politics, you are free. When it comes to the areas of economics, you are free. You can buy and sell whatever you want. You can waste your money. You can gamble it away. You can invest it. That's all your choice. That's prerogative that you have in your hands. Sexually as well, you are free. There are no restrictions whatsoever. Now, because of the freedom that is presented to us, the liberation that we have that is endorsed by society, there is an appeal towards it. When you turn towards religion, specifically Islam as a religion, forget the other Abrahamic religions. When you look at Christianity, Christianity is a religion that is developed by the Aqidah. Yes, all you have to do in order to seek salvation or attain salvation is the belief in Jesus, the son of Mary. And that's all that is required. And this was because of Paul. Saint Paul, they say he never met Jesus. He came years later, a couple of 100 years later, when they came to him and they asked him, what does it mean to be a Christian? He said, just believe in Jesus. So they don't have the practicalities of how to be a Christian or what it takes to be a Christian. With regards to Judaism, Judaism is now slowly entering this path as well. Judaism is for namesake. You can in fact be an atheist and also a Jew at the same time, where religion is rendered to a level of culture and only culture. With regards to Islam, Islam is different. It's distinguished. The reason being is because in order to be identified as a Muslim, one has to believe, but also implement the laws that have been enacted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that have been endorsed and determined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ilm and amalun salih both go hand in hand for a person to be identified as a Muslim. When you look at the religion of Islam, there are so many different restrictions. There is the halal, there is the haram, there is the wajib, the makruh, the mustahab. You're surrounded by all of these actions which govern your life. Economically, you can't buy and sell anything you want. You're restricted. When it comes to politics, when you have a position of power, there are certain akhlaq, certain adab, certain wajibats that you have to adhere to. For example, sexually, there are many different restrictions. You can't follow your desires the way society endorses you to follow your desires. When it comes to intellectually, for example, and so on and so forth, there are restrictions from all different angles, from all different dimensions. The religion of Islam mandates that you pray 5 times a day. During the summer, it becomes very difficult to wake up 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning in certain European countries. Very, very difficult. But you still have to do it. It's an obligation. When it comes to Ramadan, you have to fast. It's very difficult to fast, especially when the heat is as strong as it is in these days. Yes, it's very, very strong. It's very difficult. But you still have to do it. That's an obligation. A person has to go to Hajj. He has to spend out of his own money to go and perform Hajj, for example. He has to do all of these different tasks, and these are obligations on him. So now when you compare the two philosophies, the two ideologies, the one being presented by secular society and the other presented by the religion of Islam, the first school of thought presents freedom and liberation, whereas the second does not promote freedom and liberation. It promotes the idea that the human being is constrained, that the human being is limited. It's as if the human being is chained and placed in shackles. Now, when you put these two ideologies together, side by side, naturally people will favor societal values. Why? Because it promotes freedom. It liberates you. You can do whatever you want. Whereas if you turn to the religion of Islam constrains you. Does that make sense? For that reason, you find naturally people are now moving away from religion and they are adopting the values of society. In the past couple of nights, I've spoken of what is known as a worldview. You've heard me say this many times before. Worldview, paradigm. Essentially, they mean the same thing. They're synonymous. A worldview and a paradigm. Every worldview that is developed, it begins or it has an initiation step. And in fact, we've discussed what the initiation stage was in the first night. What it is to be a human being. This is a phenomenal question. It's a very powerful question. What does it mean to be a human being? What exactly is the nature of the human being? And we mentioned that there are two schools of thought, two predominant schools of thought. The first school of thought believes that the human being is physical and only physical. There is no ruh, there is no fitrah, there's nothing associated to the human being. He is just a culmination of matter. And that's it. Whereas Islam tells us, no, the human being is both body and ruh, but there is a fitrah that is embodied within it as well. When you answer the question, what is the nature of the human being, it influences what human interests are. So once you've identified what the human being is, you can now understand what is required to look after the interests of human beings. So first you have to answer the question, what is the nature of the human being? What exactly is the human being? Then you can answer the question, what do we need to do to cater the needs of the human being? And that has an impact when you approach to what exactly the human being is. When you understand what the human interests are, that influences the laws and the policies that you establish within society. When you look at the laws of countries, they are established to cater the needs of human beings. But it impacts, all of this impacts from the initial question as to what exactly the human being is. So secular society will say, human being, for example, is physical. The human being has all of these different desires. It has all of these different needs and wants of being free and liberated. And therefore, policies and laws are developed and established to cater such a desire. Whereas when you approach it from an Islamic perspective, Islam says that the human being is a culmination of both ruh and jism, the soul and the body. The ruh, because there is the ruh and there is the physical part of the human being, which makes up the human being, there are spiritual needs and there are physical needs as well. Physical needs and spiritual needs can only be determined by the Creator. Allah has created us. Allah knows exactly what is good for us. So He establishes laws for us. When these laws are enacted, all of it is supposed to culminate perfection within the human being. So these are two very different worldviews that have been presented to us. And they are in contrast with one another. They stand in opposition with one another. And there is no way to reconcile the two. This is a very important point to mention. You can never, in some areas, you can never reconcile the values of society and the values of the religion of Islam. So when someone comes forward and says that, look, I as a Muslim, I don't believe in the concept of hijab. So why not? He says, well, when I go to university or when I go to college or when I go to work, society as a whole doesn't endorse or doesn't advocate that I should wear hijab. In fact, if you look at certain European countries, such as France and Germany, there is this advocation of removing clothes. Women, especially amongst our sisters in the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah who are fighting to preserve the hijab, there are certain biases that are thrown towards them. For example, in Germany, a woman, in certain areas of Germany, a woman has to make a choice. If she is a muhajjaba, a person who has established hijab in her life, there are certain workplaces that she can't work. There are certain fields that she can't work in. So they have to make a choice, either remove the hijab or to stay home and not work. And these are some of the problems that our sisters are going through in Germany, for example. France, likewise. At a political level, you have policies being established to try and deter the women from observing hijab. But, holistically speaking, let's say, for example, a person comes forward and says, look, I don't believe in the values of hijab. Islam tells me that hijab is wajib, but when I look at society as a whole, there is no hijab. So there is freedom that is given from society, but there is a restraint or a constraint given from, established from the religion of Islam. Now what happens is, we favor secular society because it endorses this level of liberation. And we do not value what Islam has to present. I'll give you another example. Is there a way to reconcile the two? No, there's no way to reconcile the two. The values of society is one path, one system. The values of religion is a separate system. Let's say, for example, a person comes forward and says that I identify as a homosexual Muslim. You know, this is a dichotomy in itself. There is no such thing as a gay Muslim. There is no such thing. Why? Because on the one hand, you've taken a value that belongs in the paradigm of secular society, and you've taken a different value from the paradigm of the Islamic worldview. Is there a way to reconcile the two? No, there is no way to reconcile the two. Either you identify according to the values presented by secular society or by the values presented by the religion of Islam. There is no way to reconcile the two. So there are different attitudes towards this. When we see that there are certain laws, certain regulations, certain ahkam which have been presented by secular society and the religion of Islam, by the way, there are conflations. Yes, you'll find certain laws which are accepted by both paradigms. And this is something that is deduced by the aql. Every human being has been given the intellect. And so there are certain places where both Islam and secular society will agree. But majority of the times, or in certain major areas of our lives, there are differences between these two paradigms. Hijab, social hijab, desires, following one's lust, and all of these are different examples. So let's say there are different attitudes towards this. You'll find, for example, a person will come forward and say, look, I appeal towards what secular society is telling me. I am not attracted to what Islam is telling me. And therefore, naturally, these people, if they are not grounded in faith, they will move gradually away from the religion, and they will line themselves according to the values of society. The second attitude are those who are grounded in faith. They will see what society is presenting to them. They will see what Islam is presenting to them. But because they are grounded in faith, they have faith in what Allah and what the Quran and what the Ahlul Bayt have said. And they will side alongside the Ahlul Bayt. If they are posed questions, why do you believe in this? They will say, because it is part of our religion. It's there within the Quran. But society doesn't allow it. Let's say society isn't necessarily considered to be right in many of the values that it presents. Then there is the third attitude. The third attitude is where a person wants to be identified with the message of Islam, but also wants to appeal towards secular values. And they try to reconcile the two. But there is no way of reconciliation. There is no way of reconciliation. When you identify as a homosexual Muslim, it doesn't make sense because you've taken value from one paradigm and you've taken a different value from a different paradigm and you've tried to join it together. When you force yourself to believe that, yes, I can be a homosexual and a Muslim, now what you've done is you've given preference of one value above the other. You've given preference of one paradigm over the other. You've given superiority to secular society's paradigm, and you're now trying to mold the religion of Islam according to it. Many a times people ask the question, why can't I interact with the opposite gender? I go to work. When I just leave my house, I can see this interaction taking place at full force. Why can't I do it, for example? Often many a times they say within the mosque, within the Husseini, why can't, for example, men and women be together? Why can't men and women be together? When I go to university, men and women are studying together. When I go to work, there is open interaction between the genders. Again, this is the value of society shown through their own paradigm. You as a human being are free, you're liberated, you could do whatever you want. But the Islamic paradigm is very much different. It has its own system that there are certain boundaries that you have to adhere to. Is there a way to reconcile the two? No, there are not. There are no ways to reconcile the two. They're very much in opposition with one another. To force a reconciliation, you would have to prioritize one paradigm over the other. You will have to sacrifice one paradigm over the other. Conclusion is, there is no way to reconcile the two. Now, our refutation, by the way, there's an ayah in the Holy Quran. Ayatul Kursi, La ikraha fid din. It's a beautiful ayah, we all know it. Allah says there is no compulsion in religion. Yes, there is no compulsion. The Quran says there is no compulsion in religion. So if I identify as a Muslim, technically I'm not compelled to follow the regulations of Islam. Is that the meaning of the ayah? Of course not. Otherwise it would go against the ruh of the Holy Quran. The Quran in many areas endorses the idea of salah. Salah is wajib. Well, if there is no ikrah, if there is no compulsion in religion, then this is a contradiction in itself. Compulsion in religion, what does it mean? It means that a person does not have the authority to force someone into the religion of Islam. You cannot force a Christian, a Jew, a polytheist, or an atheist to convert towards the religion of Islam. It doesn't work that way. A person has to willingly understand what Islam is and submit to it through his own aql, through his own understanding. Otherwise, there is no compulsion in religion. Look at the message and the revolution of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa alih. the way he was able to revolutionize the area known as Hijaz, Mecca and Medina, it was all through akhlaq. There was no compulsion. The war that he began, and we'll discuss this in the coming nights, the wars that he was engaged in, they were all defensive. Never did he compel a person to come towards the religion of Islam. It was all through his morality, because of his akhlaq, people were attracted, and he was able to revolutionize that particular area within 23 years. You know, it's remarkable because one of the scholars, I remember him saying, he says that it takes 20 years to nurture a child. And in 23 years, he was able to nurture an entire society towards the religion of Islam. This was the magnitude. This was the profundity that was there in the hands of the Holy Prophet of Islam. Beyond this, a person is not compelled towards the religion of Islam. But when he enters the religion of Islam, he is surrounded by all different types of obligations, which he has to adhere to. Once you accept the message, you are duty bound to follow the message. It's like giving you an example. It's like, for example, traveling from the UK to Florida. When I get my visa and I enter American land, it's as if I'm signing the contract that once I enter, I have to abide by the law of the land. If I was to enter, for example, American soil and say, well, I can do whatever I want, I'm free, I'm liberated, I don't even need to abide by some of the laws that are established here. They'll tell me, go back home, we don't need you to be here. Yes, any land that you enter, you are duty bound to follow the law of the land. And the same principle, once you enter the religion of Islam, you are duty bound to follow the ahkam, the legislation that has been endorsed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The refutation towards this philosophy that you are free as a human being, you are liberated, there are 3 refutations altogether. Very briefly, we'll go through them. The first refutation, the idea of liberation and freedom. There is no such thing as absolute liberation and freedom. No human being is absolutely free to do whatever they want. Philosophers, many of these philosophers came after the time of the Renaissance, when there was a separation of church and state. They made it upon themselves, a responsibility upon themselves to never be governed by religion because of what the church did. So these philosophers came forward and they said that they presented this idea, this philosophy, that human beings in nature should be free and liberated. But they came across a problem. They said, well, hold on a second. If every single human being is free and liberated, then there is a significant issue. If you have something that I want, and I am free to do whatever I want to do. If I'm stronger and bigger than you, then I will take it from you. You have a nice house? No, you don't. It's mine now. You have a nice car? No, you don't. It's mine now. I'm bigger, I'm stronger. I'm not duty bound to follow any laws. So they revamped this law. John Locke was the first philosopher, one of the first philosophers who introduced a new edition. He revised the previous edition and he presented a new edition. He said that every single human being is free to do whatever they want as long as they do not harm others. This is known as the harm principle. Anyone can do anything they want as long as they do not harm or damage or harm anyone else. When you look at the idea of freedom of speech, Stanley Fish is a professor of law in the University of Florida here, the International University of Florida. He's written a book. He says there is no such thing as freedom of speech. The title of the book is There is no such thing as freedom of speech, and it's a good thing. When you look at freedom of speech, the idea that's presented to the human being in society is you are free to say whatever you want, but in reality, no, you're not. There are certain areas you are not allowed to talk about, especially in the different agendas that are being pushed forward and shoved down our throats. Nowadays, you go to certain areas of the world, if you were to openly criticize, you'll be cancelled. And we're living in a cancel culture, isn't it? If someone was to say something, automatically they're cancelled. Where's the freedom of speech? Beyond this, very interestingly, with regards to the harm principle, there is a major refutation that was proposed. if John Locke presents the idea that you are free to do whatever you want as long as it does not harm someone else, well, how do you define harm? How do you define harm? Physical harm, we get that, we understand that. But we now understand that there are different levels of harm. There is emotional harm, there is psychological harm, there is spiritual harm, and so on and so forth. Harm is not just physical. It can manifest itself in many different areas. I can harm you without even hurting you. So when you look at the laws of the land, from traffic laws to taxes, to all of the different types of laws that we're governed with in society, the underpinning or the underlying concept behind all of these laws is that we do not harm others. We work together as a society to make sure that society functions in synchronization peacefully so that we can coexist peacefully. The underlying principle is do not harm others. Other than that, you're free to do whatever you want. But harm can manifest in many different ways. You know, one of the beauties of the message of Islam, the message of the Ahlul Bayt, is do not focus on the act that a person wants to perform. Focus on the effects that it can have within our lives, within our families, within society. That's why there are certain laws which are considered to be haram, that if everyone was to engage in them, society would disintegrate. The fabrics of society would break. According to this philosophy of freedom and liberation, you have what is known as the free market. But the free market has led to capitalism. And you have certain individuals in the world, minorities, who have accumulated 95% of the world's wealth. There are certain human beings, certain individuals who have accumulated mass wealth, 180 billion net, 200 billion net, and they're competing with one another. A human being should not have that level of wealth in their hands. No human being should have that level or that amount of wealth in their hands, especially when you have hundreds queuing outside the food stamps in order to get food stamps and so on and so forth. When there are people suffering in poverty and you have a person who has accumulated that level of wealth, something's gone wrong in society somewhere. But all of this is endorsed by what? Through liberation and freedom. A human being can do whatever he wants. When you look at, for example, the idea, the concept of morality and family values is now disintegrating. The idea of families as it was envisaged 70, 80 years ago no longer exists today. Our grandmothers and their mothers, they used to have 10, 11, 12 children, yes? Some of you may have stories. For example, grandfather had 11 brothers or 12 brothers or whatever it is. Today you find hardly people having 2 or 3 children. The idea of family values has been at a decline in the past 70 or 80 years. When you look at the idea of individualism, that you yourself, this philosophy, this idea, be and let be. You're free to do whatever you want. As long as it doesn't harm you, you can do whatever you want. This philosophy is not in par with the religion of Islam. Mind your own business. No one can judge me except Allah, or no one can judge me except God. All of these philosophies is not in line with the religion of Islam. يَأْمُرْ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. That the identity of a believer is that he doesn't live by himself. He lives as a community. There is a support system that is existing within the community. We encourage each other towards good. We forbid each other from evil. We look after one another. Not that we let you be, we separate from one another. We create a barrier against one another. What happens in your own house, that's your responsibility. What you do in your own private life, that's your own responsibility. Because Islam comes forward and says that your actions and the ideologies that you develop has an effect on community. It has an effect on community. We need to support each other spiritually. When you look at the idea of family values, COVID highlighted something very, very important. If it wasn't for COVID, we wouldn't have known what is happening today. During COVID, peak of COVID, within the UK there were cases. Within, for example, certain European countries, I remember Italy had these cases. Senior citizens of the community were dying. But because everyone was in lockdown, they were dying alone in their own homes. And no one recognized that they were dead until weeks later, when the neighbors in the flats and the apartments next door would smell They would call the police, they would alert the police to come and check, and only to realize that the inhabitant of that home or that flat or the apartment had died. And they had died weeks prior. People were dying alone in their homes, and no one knew about them. This is the effect of individualism, when there is a separation from people from their families. That's why, look at the hikmah, the wisdom of Islam, when it says that when it comes to Salaat ar-Rahim, it's wajib. To deter this from happening. Prevention is far greater than the cure. If there is someone that you despise, even in your own family, make it an effort to talk to them and keep up that communication. There is barakah in it. Japan, if you look at what's happening in Japan, there is a massive social issue going on in Japan. The senior citizens are rising. The elderly community in Japan is at a rise. But the newborns has plummeted. People aren't getting married anymore. So the newborns, or the rates of newborns, has dropped significantly, and majority of the society are now elders. And this was an effect. During COVID, this was quite manifest, that people were dying alone, and no one knew what was happening to them. And their bodies were sometimes found months later. So you find that the whole concept of individualism is something that has been promoted by freedom and liberation, by the philosophy of freedom and liberation. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the philosophy of freedom and liberation is something that is presented, it is a product that is sold to the people, but it is a faulty product. The second refutation, and this is a beautiful one. The religion of Islam, sometimes the teachings of Islam, the concept that Islam endorses, it is in line with common sense. Islam says that with regards to all of these rules and regulations that you feel constrain you, in fact, it is empowering you because you become a disciplined person, you become a principled person. When these laws govern your lives, it shows that you're principled and you're not willing to waver these laws for anything else. The first priority is Allah in your mind. Everything else you are willing to belittle in the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you look at, for example, how we behave in conventional societies, we have the freedom to do whatever we want. But there are certain personalities, when we look towards them, we look at them as archetypes. We look at them as role models. They have achieved something great in their lives, which I want to extract and implement within my life. You take a successful businessman, someone who is affluent, he's worked very hard. And I can guarantee that in the beginning, there were a lot of trials and tribulations he went through in order to reach the stage that he reached. He sacrificed a lot and he compromised a lot to be able to be where he is today. That sacrifice and compromisation is a form of discipline. Islam tells you that you need to sacrifice on your desires in order to uphold the greater good, which is a good functioning spiritual community. You take the example of a child, for example, a student of the university. During exam time, the child will then study. I can guarantee you that if he was to just study during the hours that he spends in school, he won't pass his examinations or he won't be successful in his examinations. He needs to sacrifice some of his time outside of school, whether it be at home or tuition or wherever it may be, in order to understand the material so that he is successful in class. He could be out playing, he could be out wasting his time on video games and whatnot, or he could be studying. That sacrifice that he makes, instead of having fun, he should study. Later on, he will see the fruits of his discipline and his sacrifice when he gets the grades that he gets. When you look at parenting, when there is a marriage, a contract that is established between a husband and a wife, all of a sudden, for that marriage to be successful, there is a compromisation, there is a sacrifice that needs to be made by both parties. No husband and no wife can sustain a marriage if they want to live as a bachelor. Certain things have to change. There is the desire to spend time with your friends. Well, that has to be sacrificed. You need to spend more time together because that nurtures the relationship. That's when love is established within the relationship. When children are in the picture, there are more sacrifices and more compromisations that you need to make. If the husband comes forward and says, I'm free to do whatever I want, and he goes out, the wife says, I'm free to do whatever I want, and she goes out, and they leave the children with the grandparents, or they leave the children with someone else, a nanny, or whatever it is, the neighbors. Well, don't be surprised if 20 years later your children are not talking to you. Invest your time, sacrifice, compromise your desires and your time, nurture your own children. Later on, you will see the fruits. When you become old, they are very much part and parcel of your life, and they are looking after you. This is something that we all want when we grow up, when we are strong and fortified by the people that are around us. So naturally, Islam says that yes, you are free to do whatever you want, but within certain parameters and certain guidelines. You as a human being, you are filled to the brim with desires, and they will drag you in different directions. But they need to be channeled, they need to be controlled. Discipline yourself, compromise on your desires, and you will see the good later on. The third refutation that we have, before I go to the third one, in Nahj al-Balagha, if we want to know the secrets of spirituality, the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen. That's all we need. He speaks about one of his companions. He says this companion went and accompanied the Imam to one of the wars, and he was martyred. And the Imam begins to speak about him. He composes a set of eulogy in honor of him. And one of the things he mentions about him, he says that such and such person, he was a spiritual person. Why was he spiritual? He said that whenever a choice of two things was presented to him, two things were presented to him. Either he would do A or B. Both of them are halal. We're not talking about one choice being halal and the other being haram. He says both were halal. He would always choose the harder. He would always choose the harder option, because that, or through that, he would be able to discipline and he would be able to mold himself to become a spiritual person. Imam Ali alayhi salam highlights this of this companion's life, and he says that because of this, this person has seen success both in dunya as well as in akhirah. So the more disciplined a person is, the more compromises he makes, the greater the reward that he will see later on. The third refutation is the ayah of the Holy Quran. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهُهُ حَوَاهُ. Allah is saying that human beings, by definition, the way they are created, the way we are created as slaves. The choice that we have in our hands is either we become a slave of Allah. When we become a slave of Allah and we submit to His authority, this act of being slaves, we are free. We become free. We become liberated slaves, which is a paradox in itself, but is a reality according to the understanding of the Holy Quran. You become a slave of Allah, you will eventually become free. But if you choose to become slaves of anything else, especially your own desires and your own lust, you will see nothing but loss in life. When we speak about worship, when we speak about being slaves, worship in essence, what's the meaning of worship? Worship is when you recognize a higher power. When you recognize someone whom you love. You see, worship is embodied with love. Someone whom you love, but then you also turn to them in obedience. Worship is internal, which manifests externally. Internally, there is love towards the one you are turning towards, and then you turn towards them in obedience. You follow whatever they say. That's what worship is. That's what a slave is. A slave, by definition, according to the Islamic understanding, is when a person loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that love is so great that they turn to Him and they obey Him. They turn to Him in obedience. If a person does not turn to Allah in obedience, then there are certain other elements that they turn towards in obedience towards. There are certain other things that they turn towards. And in turn, they worship those things. Polytheism is not just worshipping idols. Polytheism can also be internally, where a person takes his own desires as a god. And this is what the ayah is saying. That naturally people, if they are not principled, they are not disciplined, they will take their own desires as a God, as a Lord, and they will worship themselves. When this happens, Allah says that they are misguided. How are they misguided? There is a sense, a barrier, a prevention that is there within their eyes. There is a seal over their eyes. There is a seal over their ears. There is a seal that covers their heart. And at that state, no one will be able to guide them. They are now, they have descended to the level of the animals. They are worse than the animals. The animals don't have the power of the intellect. They can't choose right from wrong. The human being knows the difference between right and wrong. And he has abused it. He has squandered that ni'mah, that blessing. He has become worse than the animals. Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyah. Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyah. He was able to escape from the situation he was in. The ayah of the Holy Quran says, Firru ilallah. Escape towards Allah. By definition, what's an escape? You see yourself in a position where you're compromised. It's threatening. You escape from it to save yourself. Allah says, Firru ilallah. And that's exactly what Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyahi does. From the very beginning, when he initiates conversations with Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, his heart is with the Imam. When it comes to Salah, Salah would always be behind Imam alayhi salam. It would never be behind anyone else. That respect, that veneration was there towards the Imam alayhi salam on the 10th of Muharram, in the morning of the 10th of Muharram. They say he comes to Ibn Sa'ad. He comes towards Umar ibn Sa'ad. He says, Ya Umar, Ya ibn Sa'ad. He says, are you really going ahead to kill Abu Abdullah alayhi salam? Are you going to go through it? Umar ibn Sa'ad says, there is no other choice. I have to go through it. He says, what sort of a battle will it be? He says, this will be a battle so severe that the heads will be separated from the bodies and the limbs will be separated from the bodies. He says, what about the proposals that Abu Abdullah has presented to you to return back to Medina and so on and so forth? He's delivered certain proposals. Have you thought about them? They could be good. It could work. Ibn Sa'ad replies, he says, this matter is not in my hands. The command has come from the higher authorities. Abu Abdullah has to be executed. They say that when he hears these words, he begins to shake. He begins to shake as he leaves. He comes across a man, Qurra ibn Qais. When he looks at Qurra, he says, Ya Qurra, have you given water to your horse? Qurra says, no. He says, give your water. Gives your horse some water. A man by the name of Muhajir ibn Aus, he comes across Hur. When he sees Hur, he says, Wallah, on the morning of the 10th, I saw him shaking. He was hesitant. I had never seen in my life a man shake, a man like Hur, a brave, very valiant warrior. He says before every battle he would stand straight. He would make his bravery manifest. But now I see him shaking. I came to him and I said, Ya Hur, are you scared? Are you afraid? Hur says, Fala. He says, La, Wallahi, I am not scared. He says, فَوَاللَّهِ إِنِّي أُخَيِّرُ نَفْسِي بَيْنَ الْجَنَّةِ وَالنَّارِ. He says, Wallah, I see myself standing in a position between heaven and hell. فَوَاللَّهِ لَا أَخْتَارَ عَلَى الْجَنَّةِ شَيْعًا. He says, I will never choose anything above Jannah. He mounts his horse, then he proceeds towards Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. When he approaches Abi Abdullah, he turns to him, he says, Yabna Rasulallah, I am responsible for bringing you towards these lands. I am responsible for behaving with you harshly. The banning of the water, that was my responsibility. Ibn Rasulullah, Allah is witness over me. I did not know that it would be this harsh. I did not know that they will not accept your proposals. I did not think that they would treat you in this way. I ask of you, Ibn Rasulullah, forgive me for what I've done. Abu Abdullah alayhi salam replies, he says, Allah has forgiven you, Ya Hur. Then he asks Abu Abdullah, he says, Ya Abu Abdullah, give me the opportunity to go and fight, to be the first martyr. Abu Abdullah responds to him, he says, the ethics of the Ahl al-Bayt is that we never start war. We are never the ones to initiate the battle. They have to initiate first. When it was time, Umar ibn Sa'ad shoots an arrow. When he shoots the arrow, he turns to his companions and he says, Wallah, be witness above me, be witness over me. When the Amir ibn Ziyad asks you, tell him that I was the one who initiated this war. Then the rest of his companions shot arrows. The narration says that there was not a single companion in the camp of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam who was struck by this arrow. All of them were injured in one way or another. Then Hur proceeds towards the battlefield. When he proceeds, he mentions these words. He says, Inni ana al-hurru ma'ma al-dhayf adribu fi a'naqikum bis-sayf an khayr min hillin bi-ardi khayf. He says, I am Hur, I am a host of my guest Abu Abdullah. I will strike you your necks with my sword in defense of the one who has been chosen in the lands of Khif. He fights and he fights valiantly. But then a time comes when they overpower him. When they overpower him, they deliver the final blow. Hur then collapses on the sons of Karbala. Abu Abdullah alayhi salam then proceeds towards Hur. He then recites these words. He says, Bakhen, Bakhen, Ya Hur. Congratulations, Ya Hur. Indeed, you are al-Hur. You are free, just as your mother has named you free. You have attained freedom now, Ya Hur. You are free in dunya as well as in akhirah. But now we have to ask the question, why was Hur not buried alongside Abi Abdullah alayhi salam? Why was Hur buried outside of Karbala? They say after the battle, Umar ibn Sa'ad commanded that the bodies are to be lined one after the other alongside each other. Then he turned towards the 10 horsemen. He said to them, trample on these bodies, trample on these bodies, make sure that you step on them. Then all of a sudden the Bani Tamim, they came forward and they said, Ya Umar ibn Sa'ad, this man here, Al-Hur, he is from our tribe. You do not have the right to trample over his body. Slowly they came and they carried the body of Hur away. Zainab was watching this from afar. She then cries out, she says, Ya Bani Tamim, you carry the body of Hur away, but you leave the body of his master behind. On the 10th of Muharram, one man says, Wallahi ma ansa qawla Zainab hina marrat bi akhiha. He says that there was a cry, the women would lament and cry, but there was one cry I will never forget. It was the cry of Zainab when she saw her brother Abi Abdullah. They asked him, what did she say? She raised her head towards the heavens She said, Wallahi wa Muhammad wa Muhammad, Sallu alayka malaikat as-sama. Oh my grandfather, may the angels give blessings towards you. Hada Husseinun bil-ara. This is Hussein fallen in the barren lands of Karbala. Muqattalul a'dha, murammilun bid-dima. This is Hussein, oh grandfather, oh my grandfather, this is your grandson Abi Abdullah. His body has been severed, drenched in his own blood. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Sayalamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalabin yanqalibun. Mata Hussein.
Ya Hussein, जब रिदा सर से छीनी मैं सदा देती रही, तू न आया गाजी. जब रिदा सर से छीनी मैं सदा देती रही, तू न आया गाजी. आले इमरान कहाँ और जिंदान कहाँ, ये बहन कैद हुई, तू न आया गाजी. जब रिदा सर से छीनी मैं सदा देती रही, तू न आया गाजी. हमको पानी ना मिले तेरी खुशबू तो रहे, तेरे बाजू ना कटे चाहे मशकी जाची दे, ये मगर हो ना सका तेरे बाजू है जुदा. मुझ पे है तशना लबी, तू न आया गाजी. जब रिदा सर से छीनी मैं सदा देती रही, तू न आया गाजी. जब रिदा सर से छीनी मैं सदा देती रही, तू न आया गाजी. धूप में तू था शजर, तुझसे आबाद था घर, है बरहना मेरा सर, क्या नहीं तुझको खबर. ए अलमदार वफा, इस बहन को बाखुदा तुझसे डारती बरी, तू न आया गाजी. जब रिदा सर से छीनी मैं सदा देती रही, तू न आया गाजी. आ गई शाम आलम, लुट गए ले हरम, रेत पर जलती हुई हो गया ठंडा आलम. पुरसा देने के लिए, मुझसे मिलने के लिए आ गए बाबा अली, तू न आया गाजी. जब रिदा सर से छीनी मैं सदा देती रही, तू न आया गाजी. क्या कहूँ शेर मेरे बेरिदा हम कोई लिए, ये मुसलमान सारे شہر در شہر گئے خلقت کوفہ کبھی خلقت شام کبھی اور ہاں ہم پہ ہنسی کیوں نہ آیا غازی جب ردا سر سے چھینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی کتنی بے بس تھی بہن اے شہنشاہ وفا نام لے لے کے میرا جب یہ ظالم نے کہا ناز تھا جس پہ تجھے اب بلاؤ نہ اسے اور میں روتی رہی کیوں نہ آیا غازی جب ردا سر سے چھینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی قید خانے میں قضا جب سکینہ کو ملی دیکھ کرتے کا کفن بچی دفنائی گئی اس گری نام تیرا صورت ناد علی دکھ میں دہراتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی جب ردا سر سے چھینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی جب ردا سر سے چھینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی حسین یا 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 حسین حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین واویلا ہے واویلا 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 واویلا ہے سب اہل عزا واویلا ہے واویلا 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 اسلام نبی کا بچایا ہے تقدیر کا دیپ جلایا ہے تقدیر کا دیپ جلایا ہے قرآن کمان برایا ہے توحید پہ گھر کو لٹایا ہے شبیر کا ماتم دلگیر کا ماتم یہ اہل عزا کا ہے نوحہ واویلا ہے واویلا 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 ہم شکل پیمبر مارا گیا 6 ماہ کا سے گر مارا گیا 6 ماہ کا سے گر مارا گیا عباس دلاور مارا گیا شبیر کا دل پر مارا گیا اکبر کا ماتم اصغر کا ماتم زینب کے لبوں پر تھی یہ صدا واویلا ہے واویلا 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 کیسے ہو رقم احوال جفا آدان ستم کچھ ایسا کیا آدان ستم کچھ ایسا کیا قاسم کا جد پامال ہوا بے حال ہوئی ام فروا قاسم کا ماتم بے کس کا ماتم قاسم کا غم ہے اور فروا واویلا ہے واویلا 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 کیا غربت تھی تنہائی تھی جب شام غریب آئی تھی جب شام غریب آئی تھی ایک ظلم کی بدلی چھائی تھی پیغام اسیری لائی تھی غربت کا ماتم عطرت کا ماتم سب اہل حرم کی چھین ردا واویلا ہے واویلا 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 پابند سلاسل اہل حرم خاموش اٹھائے بار ستم خاموش اٹھائے بار ستم ہے محو سفر لرزیدہ قدم سینوں میں لیے شبیر کا غم مظلوم کا ماتم معصوم کا ماتم کرتا ہے فلک ان پر گریا واویلا ہے واویلا ہے واویلا واویلا ہے واویلا ہے واویلا بچھتا ہے جہاں پر فرش عزا، ہوتا ہے جہاں پر غم برپا، ہوتا ہے جہاں پر غم برپا، پرسا کو پہنچتی ہے زہرا، کرتے ہوئے سارے یہ نوحہ سرور کا ماتم، گھر گھر کا ماتم، پیاروں پر کرتی ہے روز بلا، فاطمہ زہرا، 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 یا 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 زہرا، تو ہمیں دے دے اپنی چادر کا سائبہ دے دے، تیری قدرت میں کیا نہیں بی بی، تو جسے چاہے دو جہاں دے دے، یا زہرا، یا زہرا، یا زہرا، یا زہرا، یا اپنی چادر کا سائبہ دے دے، تیری قدرت میں کیا نہیں بی بی، تو جسے چاہے دو جہاں دے دے، یا زہرا، یا زہرا، یا زہرا، یا زہرا، فرش مجلس پہ اور مصلی پر ہر جوان کہہ رہا ہے رو رو کر، ہم رہے نہ رہے مگر بی بی، تا قیامت رہے گا میں سرور، یا زہرا، 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 فرش مجلس پہ اور مصلی پر ہر جوان کہہ رہا ہے رو رو کر، ہم رہے یا رہے مگر بی بی، تا قیامت رہے غمِ سرور، یا زہرا، یا زہرا، یا زہرا، یا زہرا، یا زہرا، یا زہرا، یا حسین، یا حسین، یا حسین، یا
مباركة الفاتحة.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدتي نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام عليك يا حسين شهيد بكربلاء، السلام عليك يا علي زين العابدين، السلام عليك يا محمد الباكر، السلام عليك يا جعفر الصادق، السلام عليك يا موسى الكاظم، السلام عليك يا علي الرضا، السلام عليك يا محمد التكي الجواد، السلام عليك يا علي النكي الهادي، السلام عليك يا حسن العسكري، السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب العصر والزمان، الأمان الأمان الأمان، السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم كل وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا حتى تسكنه أرضك توأى وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.